Okay, guys, we're recording. We're going to get started. Want to respect your time today. We've got, there's one more person joining us. Welcome, Olivia. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you guys had enjoyed the last few days of beautiful weather. It's been really nice out. So I hope you guys were able to get outside and stretch your muscles and do what you needed to be done. Today, we are going to continue on with our Wick Editor. So this is going to be our second lesson on using the Wick Editor program. So if you missed it or don't remember, Wick Editor is a browser-based animation program that will allow us to do some frame-to-frame editing, which is what we did, or sorry, animating, which is what we did last week. This week, we're going to be working on a pose-to-pose editing, and we're going to be talking about something called tweening is what's going to happen. So tweening, we're going to show you. I'll have a little link here that I'm going to post up for you guys after. I'll share this and roll it back. Okay. So as we said, we talked about frame-to-frame animation. And frame-to-frame animation is really good for creating something that is maybe an unnatural or kind of hard to program type of movement, right? If you had an explosion or you were using a flame or something like that, then a flickering flame on a top of a candle would be great to use as a frame-to-frame animation because it maintains a kind of source of spontaneity as you move through it. When we talk about pose-to-pose animation, that's for when you really need to, you maybe don't have all the time to fill in all the drawings by hand. Maybe you really want to make sure that it's done evenly over a certain timeline as you move through. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to learn about the concept known as tweening and how that's going to work in Wick Editor for our project this week. So tweening is shorthand for in-betweening, and it's a key process in all types of animation, especially computer animation. It's the process of generating intermediate frames between two images called keyframes. So that gives the appearance that the first image evolves smoothly into the second image. So if I'm looking here at this example of a ball bouncing up and down, instead of me drawing every single one of these frames one by one, what we're doing is using keyframes. And we would say, okay, here's frame number 1. And I'm going to guess that by about frame number 6, about half a second, I want it to reach this top of the bounce, the apex of the arc. And then I can click that, select that as a keyframe, and the computer will fill in all the frames in between there evenly. So we can go back and make adjustments. So you can see that this animation, how far the ball is between from there to there or there to there. It gets a little bit different here. And getting over here, it becomes a little closer and overlaps. So they may go back and tweak little frames bit by bit, but it gives them kind of an idea as they build it. And then you would go and build the third keyframe, maybe 6 frames down as well, and put it over there. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using Tweens to create a Pong style animation. So if you've never heard of Pong before, very one of kind of the great-great-grandfather of video games was, it's got kind of simple thing on screen. It looks like 2 ping pong paddles, right? One here, and the ball goes back and forth and it can bounce off the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, kind of like a big game of air hockey. And you can control the paddle on just an y-axis, whatever the vertical axis would be. I think that's Y, up and down, so that you can change that as you move through. So I just want to double check. There we go. Got JC. Allow him in. Perfect. So I put in the note today that I'm going to put up right after our lesson is finished. And so I attached this note. There is the history of Pong here, a nice short kind of video. If you watch this, gives you a little bit of an idea of the beginning of these home systems that began. So you can watch that. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. Good little history lesson. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be creating a little digital game of ping pong, the ball going back and forth using these digital paddles that we're going to create, and it's going to ricochet the ball back and forth on either side. The animation is going to last for at least 60 frames, okay? Now, our default animation setting when we log into Wick is 12 frames per second, right? So for every 12 frames, you have 1 second of time. So You can see 12, 24, 36, 48, and 60. So 60 frames means that your animation is a minimum of it is exactly 5 seconds long. If you want to create something longer and more intricate, if you're enjoying it and you want to challenge yourself, by all means, you can make it something else, but it must go in, I want you to jump by 12, right? So go by 1 second. So if you're not going to use 60, your next option has to be 72, right? 60 plus 12, meaning 1 more second. So now your animation goes from 5 seconds to 6 seconds. 6 seconds to 7. If you want to go further, then it needs to go to 84, 96. So follow along, adding 12 as each time as you move through. So we're going to take a look at Wick. We'll jump right in, and you guys will be able to follow this as I record this and post this for you afterwards. So remember, if you go to Wick Editor, you go to the actual site, wickeditor.com, and you click Launch Editor, it's going to open up the regular animation part right here. If you have any questions, sorry, as I go through here and you need to stop me, please jump in and let me know. I'm trying to see where the chat thing has gone here. Just want to make sure that's available to me so I can see it. Perfect. Okay, so if we have our beginning thing here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a minimum of 4 layers. So we want to be able to animate and change each element in our script or in our animation on its own without affecting something else. So our 4 elements that we're going to have the ball, we're going to have paddle on the left-hand side, we're going to have a paddle on the right-hand side, and then we're going to have the background. So we're going to have a background layer that we can change a texture just to make it a little bit more visually interesting instead of having this kind of boring white background. So we're going to change, those are our 4 layers. You may look after you see some of the examples and try and challenge yourself and create more layers, and maybe you're going to put some type of obstacles or different things for it to bounce off of. That's cool as well. You're going to do each one as a separate layer. So as we put them through, here we go. So my first layer that I'm going to create is the ball. So I'm going to click on this layer, and instead of drawing our ball handheld like we did last time, we're going to use our shape editors up here. So you'll see, before we used the brush and we drew it, and each time you do that, you have to draw that step by step, and it's hard to keep your scale. But by using the shape editor, we can keep this shape the exact same wherever we need it, and it'll stay. It also is easy to use the kind of tools to squash and stretch it. So I'm going to click on the ellipse tool. I'm going to choose a different color. I'm going to choose a nice, easy red color for me to use, and I'm going to draw it. Now, if I'm going to draw this, remember, if I go and start drawing it and I just click and drag, it's not going to constrain my image to the same aspect ratio. So if I look here, this is more of an oval than a circle. That's no good for when we're starting. So you want to make sure that you're holding your shift key. Hold your shift key down, click, and it will create that ball for you, perfect on either side. So I'm just going to move that over. So ball is first layer. Now, we need this layer to be at least 60 frames. So we want to make sure that it goes all the way across. If I click here and I go to frame 2, 3, 4, it sees nothing there. So what I have to do is go to the edge of this layer and drag it. Drag it all the way over. And keep going. So there it's got up to 40. I might have to stretch it a little bit further. Right up to 60 frames. So now, right now, all of those 60 frames have the ball exactly where it's starting. We're going to come back to that in a second, all right? The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually label these layers. Now, when you guys go to hand in your work this week, instead of it being just a GIF where I can see what's just the finished product, I'm going to have you actually hand in the project file, the Wick file. So you can see up here where you have that green save file. When you go to click save, it'll be able to save it. It'll be like a .wic, some type of file that when you share it to me, I will come in here and go to open, and I'll open your file, and I'll get to see your entire project. So I'll see your layers, I'll see the tweens that we're going to create in between here as we go through. So that's what I want to make sure that we're doing. So first layer, I'm going to come up here, over here in the layer, and I can actually label it. So I'm going to call it ball, right? It just makes it easier when I'm over here scrolling through things to make sure that I'm on the right layer as I'm editing my thing. So here we have one layer is ball. Second layer, I'm going to click to make a brand new layer. New layer is going to be, click on frame number 1. We're going to make the paddle. So to make the paddle, I'm going to use the rectangular tool. I don't want it to be red because I don't want the ball to bounce off that. So I'm going to use something darker. Just going to use black. Keep it simple. And now, again, if I was to, for this, it's going to be a rectangular shape. If I wanted a perfect square and I held shift, it would create that perfect square, but that's not the way the paddle is going to look. So when I draw it, I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to make it about this size, right? So that if I click it and grab it, and I move it over here, it's going to be on this side, and the ball, this paddle is going to move on the vertical plane up and down here to kind of bounce the ball as we go through. And here's where it's going to start. Same thing now, I need to stretch this out to make this 60 frames as well, because it's going to appear for the entire animation. Again, oops. Stretch it out. And 60, there we go, right? If I had stretched this out and I had just accidentally went, oh, okay, it's gonna go to 60, watch what happens when I move past it. That ball is just gonna disappear, but that paddle would still be there. Doesn't really work for us, right? So we're gonna drag that back. There we go, make it match 60 frames. Now we're gonna create, before I move on, I'm gonna label that. So I'm just gonna click on layer, come up here and call that left paddle. Great, now we've got left paddle down here. Down here, now I just click and move down a bit, make my third layer. Third layer is going to be exactly the same. We want this to actually, this shape to be the same. So I'm actually going to go back up and see if I can just copy this shape from here. I click here and I go to copy, and I click down to here and I hit paste. It's created the exact same icon that I can move over here. So now I know it's the exact same size, right? Which if you're playing a video game, makes sense that they're the same size and that they're uniform. Same thing now, stretch this out to 60 frames. Great, click up here, make sure I label it, and we're gonna call that right paddle. The last thing that we're going to do near the end will be we're going to create our background texture layer. We don't have to worry about that quite yet. So we're just going to focus on dealing with these three things that we have right now. So right now our animation, there's no animation to it. It's just standing still. It doesn't do anything. What we want to do is we're going to create our tween. So when I click on frame 1, right there, see how I've activated, make sure I'm on the ball layer. I'm on frame 1. And there's this button right here, not the delete button, not the add frame, but add tween, right there above the menu kind of spot there. So I hit add tween, and you'll see it's going to change. It puts this little diamond here, which is making a keyframe, and then it gives me these long kind of layers here, or sorry, these little army ants that go towards the other end. Now, it hasn't done anything. It's going nowhere because I haven't set where a second keyframe or anything is going to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way to the end, and I'm going to say, great, on my very last frame of animation, I'm going to make another keyframe. Click there, and it makes that little keyframe icon. And now I'm going to click on this icon, right, the button that I have here, and where do I want this to actually end? I want it to end up off the screen over here. Okay, so I'm just going to put it right there. So now if I scroll back, all it's doing is filling in all the frames, a direct line between there and there, the end. If I hit play, it's going to be very, very slow because it's 60 seconds, right? And normally, so that's just the beginning of it. We've got 2 keyframes. Now we want to start adding some other keyframes because I don't want it to just go boom once. I want it to go off the wall, he blocks it, off the wall, she blocks it, off the wall, and score. So I'm going to be making keyframes for at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that last part is 6. So 5 more keyframes at the bare minimum to chart the movement of what I'm going to do. So now is where you have to start to think and do a tiny bit of mental math of how fast something should move, right? If I'm going to create this one, I'm going to say, okay, how fast, if it's coming off here, does it bounce to here, right? And I'm going to guess that I'm going to say I want it to take about just under half a second. Should be kind of fast, right? If you're playing a game of air hockey, it's moving back and forth, it moves pretty good. So I'm going to go to the 5th frame. See, I can see the numbers there. Frame number 5. And I'm going to add another tween, which is basically adding another keyframe. So I'm going to say click, and now I can move this to where I want it to be at this frame. So I'm going to say at this frame, on the 5th frame, you should be bouncing off the wall right here. Now, when I scroll it back, it's going to go to here first. Then it's going to just continue to do that slow motion, right? So I can see that's the first bounce. The second bounce, right? Once it hits here, it's going to ricochet back towards this way. Are we going to squash and stretch it? Absolutely, we're going to go back and do those. But first, we're going to set our keyframes just to get our timing right, okay? So the next one, it's going to bounce, let's say, over here. I want this to actually have to move, these paddles. I don't want the paddles to just stay still. That's very boring. So I'm going to say that in about another 6 frames, it's got a little further to go. Let's call it 6 frames or so. If I hip ahead to, say, frame number 11, at frame 11, create a new tween, another keyframe. And this keyframe is going to be right over here, I'm going to say. Okay? So now it's going bop, bop, right? Kind of imagine those little ping pong noises happening as it moves through, 1 and up. But we're going to continue to move. So now we've set, you can see each one of these is a keyframe. Now you could go in and keyframe every single frame if you so desired. Kind of takes away the point of animating a little bit with tweens at that point. Hopefully you want to let the computer do a little bit of the work. So we've gotten to here. Now I want it to bounce up here. So I'm going to go again. 4 or 5 frames ahead, create a new tween. And I'm going to say, now I want it to bounce here. Right? So now again, 1, 2, 3. And you'll see it's always going to start going back towards that final frame. So that's why we have to continue to build in our keyframes so that it moves around. So from there, now I want this ball to kind of ricochet this way and the paddle to have to move a little bit further. So I'm going to say, great, we're going to go about 5 more frames. 5 more frames from now, add a tween, and it should be coming about here. Go back. Right? Now I'm moving pretty fast, right? So you can see we've now gone 1, 2, 3, 4 as we move through, and that's going to be just under 2 seconds worth of action, right? So wait till it starts up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have to continue. So it's up to you on how many times you want to make it ricochet off. But again, it has to have at least twice. I want it to hit the other paddle once, hit the other paddle once, and then you can either finish it like the example that I have over here. Or you can carry away and do more frames if you'd like. Okay, so rolling it back, where's my last frame? The last one is there. And again, we're going to move these paddles and animate them so that they work with those in just a little bit. But first, we're going to focus on the tweens of the ball. So the next one, again, is going to bounce somewhere else. Now I don't want it to bounce on the exact same spot I did before, so now I'm going to have it come off at maybe a little different angle. So I'm going to aim for it to bounce somewhere over here. So I'm going to give that about 6 frames. Add a tween, move it down to here, right? So now again, boom, 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 and where is it going to go back up? So what we might realize from this is, based on the speed of how we're doing this, I may change where my final tween actually ends up, where my final keyframe ends. But it gives us a chance to kind of build this as we go through. So if I'm going from here, I'm going to, for the sake of this, have it bounce one more time, and this team is going to win the right-hand side. So you give it about 5 or 6 frames here. Add another keyframe. This time it's going to bounce here, so this has to move. Right? Bounce, bounce, and now I'm going to have it go up this way. So again, another 6 or 7 frames, and I'm going to move that up. Right? Now you can really see it's starting to come together. Bounce, 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 bounce. And you can see the timing changed a little bit, right? If you notice between this one, if you're looking at my rough idea of how fast they're moving, sometimes if you're looking here, this is going a shorter distance. So it should have less frames, which it does. But when I get to here, and I've got this long stretch to here, I'm going from this frame right here to a bounce right here. That's probably too long. It doesn't seem to make sense with the speed. I can click the actual frame. I can click right here with my mouse, hold, and drag that keyframe back a frame or two if I find that I need to speed it up, the actual idea of it, and that's fine. Boom. So now it'll kind of keep up with the speed that we've worked with. So great, let's hit here. Now this guy's gonna go for the kill shot here. We're gonna have him, sorry, went to that one. And then it's gonna try and score. So we're gonna try and have it score on this side. So what I'll do, I'm gonna go back to my old keyframe and I'm gonna bring it back about here. I'm gonna end that keyframe off the screen down here. So I've decided to change it, right? There's that final score. And I'm actually gonna move it. If I go down to this keyframe, I'm gonna move it over a little bit further so it's a bit sharper of an angle. And I'm gonna make it just a hair faster as it comes through. So it's gonna bounce there, make a hard ricochet this way because we want these things to actually miss. Now you'll say, okay, well you have nothing on that screen for those 10 seconds. If we go back and look at our example, the other thing that we're gonna create as it scores is we're gonna have a little message where it says victory or you win, something like that. So I wanna leave some frames in between there. So now it's time to start moving and animating the paddle, okay? So we wanna match this all up. So I'm gonna bring this back here. When I make this start, I'm gonna have this frame. So first of all, I have to make it a tween. We haven't done that yet. So I'm gonna hit click, add tween, right? And now I can move each one of these bit by bit if I want to match them up. So I can say, great, when it starts to move, in order to kind of give the illusion of this pushing, we're going to have it move just a little bit. So I'm going to click here, and just as it gets to 2 frames in, I'm going to have it move just a little bit down. I'm going to actually use the arrow keys so that it stays perfectly on the line, the vertical line that I want it to stay on, the proper axis, right? So it just gives that little illusion of motion here as it moves through, right? When I push it, just pushes that little bit, okay? Now, the paddle's gonna stay there and do nothing until, as it comes back this way, it feels like it's making its way towards here. So I might be here, and now you can imagine your player starting to react. So I'm gonna make a frame right here. I gotta make sure I'm on the right layer. See how sometimes you move over and you'll click on the wrong layer? Make sure you're on the layer that you're trying to deal with, which is the left paddle. I'm gonna make a new keyframe right here. And because I don't want the movement to start, I'm gonna have a keyframe here first before that. Then my new keyframes start to move over from that. So I'm gonna say, great, when it gets to here, it matches up. I want it to be down here. Right? So that it impacts that. So now if I roll it back, it's moved a little bit, it stays and waiting, it's reacting. Now it reads the reaction and it says, oh, I've got to move down here. So watch that in proper motion, right? So each time we've moved over that little bit. I think it's easier for me. You could sit and play. It's up to you. You could move and jump back and forth with the left paddle and the right paddle. Up to you on how you want to do that. I'm going to wait and just move them all on their own. So there's one. Then I know it's going to bounce again. Bounce up here. This one is going to come for that kill shot. In order for that to happen, I actually have to have it move out of the way, right? So I might say, oh, it gets up to here. And now we're going to create a little tween and just move the paddle a little bit. So we're going to say, okay, I'm going to move it slowly. I'm going to add another tween, click on the object, using my arrows so that it stays nice and straight. Moves up to there. So that now you can see there's a little bit of a read. And then when it comes back down, we don't want it to, see how it's overlapping there? If it overlapped, it would move. So that means that I have to go back and on this frame, move this even further. It has to make more sense that it goes a little bit further, so that when it comes back around, it has a clear shot. And what I'm going to do, just to add a little bit more realism to it, is I'm going to move, so I am going to move that just a little bit further. And then as it comes back down this way, I'm going to start it moving so that it looks like it's just too slow. So when it gets to here, the ball is there. I'm going to add a keyframe. And as it goes off the screen like that, I'm going to add another keyframe to make it seem like it started to move, right? So now it comes back around. And I'll say, oh, he missed it, right? Just gives that little bit of motion as you move through. Now you'll create the other one exactly the way I did this one. So you'll go back onto the right paddle, go back to the beginning of your animation, and decide where do you want it to go, right? So I'm realizing at about this point. So first off, sorry, you have to create and set that it is a tween. So go to the first frame, add that it is a tween. Now I'm going from about here as it bounced. Here's where it starts. You have to make a keyframe where it's not necessarily doing anything. So it's saying, hey, from here to here, stay exactly where you are. But as you get over to here, now we're going to add another keyframe. And move that up, right? You might even decide to have it arrive a split second early. Just like that. So you'll go through all those and add those as we go through. The last, there's two last stages that we're gonna work on. One is we're gonna add some stretch to the ball. So if we click on the ball and it moves down, just like we've done in our squash and stretch, we know that as it starts to pick up speed, the actual shape is going to stretch out a little bit. So if I click this, make sure I'm on the ball, one, I can see here that I can do a bunch of things here. I can stretch out the shape of it, right? So if something goes a little wider, it's probably going to go a little skinnier as well, like on that side. But that doesn't look right, right? The tip point of this, the kind of edge of it should be more like this, right? Should be moving towards that direct angle of where it's going to hit, right? Now for this frame, click, and we're gonna stretch. You wanna make sure, you have to be careful when you make it shrink a little bit, it's gonna move up a bit and move off the wall. It's not gonna look natural if it doesn't actually come into contact with it. So I'm gonna move, click on it and move it down a couple frames so that it looks like it's actually impacting with that. Now, the weird thing that's gonna come off, that edge is gonna go to that spot. So you're gonna probably tilt it a little bit off that first frame so that it's down this way a little bit. Still feels like it's kind of stretching out, right? Now I have to start thinking, how am I gonna get towards my next frames? So from here, I know that when I get to here, I'm going to be creating a kind of squash as well, but I want to go back and say, okay, well, how am I going to get to that spot? I know that in the middle here, it's going to be pointing back towards the other way. So I'm going to create a new tween, take my shape, rotate it, and you can see it stretching that way. So if you find that it's going along, it's not fully stretched out the way you want. Here it looks like it's pretty flat, kind of, or sorry, regular. Just come in, click, add a tween, and you can make whatever change that you need to do in order to do that. Rotating it, however it was. So I'm afraid, go back a frame, look a frame. Now I'm hitting here, and my squash is happening, right? Again, same thing, I have to look here. After I did that, it's off the paddle. That doesn't make any sense, so it has to kind of come back and go a little bit as it moves through. So now I can see hitting that next paddle. You'll see, because the ball is on the top, it might be better to move the ball underneath these paddles, right? Just like Photoshop, whatever the first one is going to be, if it overlaps and goes underneath, it's going to look a little bit more natural to feel like it's squishing and impacting that than to overlap it. So if I run it back, hit play, I can see where I need to start to go back through and add my changes. So I'm going to do a couple more here just to show you and finish it up. And then we're going to wrap up. So I've moved to here. Now I know I'm going towards my second one, right? My first frame as I go off of here. Making sure I'm on ball. I'm going to add another tween, because now it's changing the entire ricochet kind of direction as to what it's doing here. So it has to go boom, right? I know that this frame here, wherever it connected, has to be a squish of some sort. So let's have it bounce over the top of that, right? So I can see as it moves towards here. Again, this frame here looks really out of place, right? It looks like it's going, because it's not going very far between there. So you have to really go back and check and see how you're going to keep your momentum and your shape of these things. And it's, in order to make a change, you have to create a keyframe for each one. So make sure that you've added the keyframe. If you haven't added your keyframe, it's going to look really awkward. So again, we can keep it that way a little. Stretch. And it's hard not to make it go very straight. So if I see from here, 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 the tip of this really is not rotated as drastically as it needs to be. That looks a little bit more natural as we're moving towards what we're trying to do, right? So again, keep that stretch going in the correct way. Try and imagine an kind of line pointing out of the end of this, right? If this is going this way, it feels like it's going to connect here. But if it doesn't, right, it feels like it kind of ends up moving over a little bit more. Then maybe you need to change your initial arc, your initial angle just a little bit more so that the trajectory feels more natural, right? And all of that is going to deal with where your next subject is heading. Boom. Don't be afraid to kind of really exaggerate that squash at that point. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so now we have two last steps before we move on. Obviously, you're going to be doing all these other steps in between to finish the entire animation. I'm moving through. One is we're going to add a texture background. So your texture background can be whatever you choose to make it. The only thing that I would suggest is you need to make sure that it has a contrast to the paddles and your ball. So if you have like me, where I have a black paddle and a red ball, I don't want a heavy red dominant background or black background like that, right? Instead, I'm just going to find some kind of abstract type of document. In order to get that, I come over here and I'm going to go to upload assets. I need to add something to this in order to do it. If I download something from, just go to Google and download a, let's jump over to, here, I'll steal this browser. And let's say I'm going to use pool table. Let's just type pool table texture. Great, I come into images. Here's a fairly clean one with nothing on it. Remember, we don't want to have a big Shutterstock kind of logo or anything here. I'll look at this one. Looks fairly clear. I'm going to save this image. Call it pool table. Now I jump back to my Wick Editor and I upload the asset. So I'm going to upload the asset. I'm going to look for it, find it on my desktop, which was pool table. There's my picture. And now that asset happens down here. Now, before I can drag that into my screen, I need to make a new layer. So I'm going to come down here and make a new layer. And I'm going to call that layer background. Now I can come over here on frame 1 and bring in this pool table layer. So I click, drag it on here, and some of it is gonna, depending on the size of what yours was, maybe it was much bigger, maybe it was much smaller, you have to stretch it out so that it fits and covers your whole piece. Now, one thing you'll notice, I'm gonna show you a little warning, try and finish your animation first. I'm gonna show you why. You can't change, if you go up like this, it shrinks the whole thing. It's hard to necessarily fit it perfect like that. And it's okay if you go over the edges a little bit. When it exports, it's only going to export the 720 by 480. So if I had green like this, my animation is only going to happen in this frame that you can't really see unless I went and changed the opacity. So I can see only going to happen there, right? So if I try and shrink that to fit as close as possible, that's a little tricky. See, then it moves over. Got to bring it back. And the reason that's important is because if it was over a little bit too far at the top, you may be tempted to bounce the ball off a spot that is not really your actual edge. So I would recommend doing this texture layer as the very end of what you're going to do. So here's my layer. Now I can see if I move past it, it's not there. I have to stretch this out again all the way to 60 frames. That's the length of my animation. Now I have this all the way through, right? So we've got that layer now, our background layer, and now we have one final layer that we're going to create. So we're going to click New Layer. And I'm actually going to move this layer above my background. I don't want it to be there. Click New Frame. And what we're going to be doing is we're not going to be creating this animation here. We're not actually going to have it on frame 1. I'm going to have it way over here after we score. And this is going to be our text layer. So again, it's going to go off. Once it passes, now I'm going to have this layer start. I'm going to stretch it from 50 to 60, right? There's my animation in here. And I'm going to create text. So I click the text, click on here where I want to type it, and I put Dunphy wins. Great. When you actually click on it, if I use my cursor tool, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit further so you can see. Now I can come over here and I can change my font family, right? So let me select it all. Come in, choose something nice and bold, change the style to who knows there. I'm not sure if it has a thing for me to center it. Would be nice, but maybe they don't have that. Since they don't have that, I'm going to go back into my text and just push this one forward just a little bit so it looks kind of centered, looks nicer, right? And I'm going to make the whole thing bigger. So I'm going to hold Shift, scale this up. Dunphy wins. Great. So I'm going to start this on keyframe off the page. So the very first frame is going to be down here. Now I'm going to create a tween because I'm going to animate this texture and move it right onto the screen. So I'm going to go tween, and then I'm going to say, great, at about frame 53, it's only just going to take a quick second to rotate, move in, or maybe slower if you want to. On this frame, now I'm going to add another keyframe, put it up to here. There it is, right? If I want to change the color of that, I think you can do those things as well when you're in there selecting your text. Oops, I just made a new layer. Let's not do that. Let's get rid of that. This one should have the fill. May have to create it when you first make it. So great, so there it is. It's going to come in and it lands there, and then it's going to stay for the rest of that animation, just like that. Other thing that I can mess around with this, if I click on this image, or this, let's call it a button as you have it here, I can do things with the size and the scale, and I can even change the rotation. So I could have it start down here, rotated like this, right? And normally, and then have it rotate back to the way it wants to end. Just to add a little flair to it if that was what you so desired, okay? Obviously, the other thing that I haven't done is I haven't layered it, so I'm gonna put that in, call it Tween, sorry, labeled, not layer it. So now I have that layer. My background is officially my last layer that you can see on there. Okay, so again, just to go back and make sure that I've done everything correct, I've got a left paddle layer, a right paddle layer, the ball layer, the text layer, and your background, okay? I can see even by staring really closely that that background is just off. See how there's just a thin scale of white there? I'm gonna click on this background layer and just tap it over that little bit. Much cleaner, there we go. I think I might even have to go up one more. No, maybe not. So now I'm all finished to say, great, how do I get out of here? What do I want to do? How do I share this with Mr. Dunphy? You're going to go over here. You have two options, right? First is you can export it as a GIF if you wanted to share it or try it. You would do that just like you did last week. But what I want to do is I want to be able to see all your keyframes, all of your layers correctly done to make sure that it was done by you. So you're going to go save, and it's going to say successfully saved .wick file. So however you're going to save it here on my desktop, I'm saving it, and I'm going to call it TGJ201. Sorry, this stuff is in my way from Zoom. Let's try that again. TGJ201. Pong, and then my last name, right? You want to put your last name so that when I mark it, I know exactly who I'm marking. So you'll see I'll save. Great, that'll go to my desktop and it'll be a .wic. So instead of a PNG or a GIF or a PSD, that's what you'll have. So now if I went to a completely new project later, if I added yours, let's say I go here, Mr. Dunphy opens it up, he goes to open up this project, and I go, great, open, should be able to look on the desktop and find .wick file, click it, I open it, and it's gonna load up your entire project. So I should be able to see each project as they're handed in. So this one is worth a little bit more marks than last week's. So last week's was fairly simple. This one gets a little bit more difficult. I'm gonna put up for you guys that document that I've been sharing, just a little bit, probably about 10, 15 minutes. I just wanna go over it and double check that I have everything correct that I put in there. And I will also share this video that we're watching right now that we're sharing. Anybody have any big questions, whether it's about this or anything else about school related before we call it a day? Anybody like freaked out and scared of that animation? think you guys are all going to be able to do it. You'll see. I put that through while I was explaining, and I was able to do it in, you know, whatever that took, 25 minutes or something like that, half an hour. If you're focused, again, you'll be able to take about your, you know, if you take about 2 hours of it, you'll make an amazing animation. I challenge any of you that are really keen on animation. If you go on the Wick website, and I'll put maybe the link up there as well, you can actually download how to add and sync sound effects. So if you want to find a sound effect of a ping pong noise or some type of noise for each time it hits the sound, it could be a squeaky chicken, rubber chicken noise, who knows, whatever, or put in some background music. I will put that link for that tutorial in there. And if you want to give that a try, great, but it is not mandatory that you add the sound effects. It is just there as a personal challenge to those of you who are interested in the subject and want to learn a little bit differently. I'll put that in for you, and maybe I'll put I'll add an example onto to my example and share it with you guys this week as well. Okay, again, if you get stuck this week, please don't hesitate, send a message, and I will try and walk you through it, help you get started or wrap up or anything like that. Please remember to save it as the .wick file and submit that. You do not need to send me the GIF. If you want to send me both so I can see the GIF initially and then see your .wick file, that's fine, but I need the WIC file to give you this full marks. That's it for now, 252. Thank you. I think that's our longest lesson of the year. Good thing I taped it. Please have a great week. Stay safe, stay warm out there because it's really nice. And now I'm just rambling. Thanks. Have a great week. You are free.